champions that we have, that we're going to make this a reality. And so I'm grateful for our public education department being so supportive, trying to find ways to be creative to get these funds where they're needed, and more importantly, to recognize that this is just the beginning. This is just the opportunity for us to take a step forward in the right direction. Because if we want true academic achievement, we have to remember that true academic achievement comes in a balanced approach, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and socially. You guys provide that every single day. And I can't stress enough how proud I am to be part of your network, to be advocating on your behalf, and to continually work together. So I just want to say, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for what you do for my children, for other children, and people across the state of New Mexico. I think it's easy to say that, when we have essential workers across the state, which we're so grateful for, that it's important to point out that you are essential workers, not only during a pandemic, essential workers every single day. So thank you for this opportunity. I know that I jump on my next call at 10:15, so I have a couple of minutes if there's some questions that want to be asked. But I know you have a packed agenda too, so I don't want to take too much time. But above all, keep the foot on the gas, keep moving forward, and let's make sure that we can get the results that we want for every one of the programs that we have across the state. Thank you so much, Mai. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity once again.
Oh, thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for inspiring us this morning. It's good to hear positive energy and belief that this work really matters. And I do think we can take a couple of questions, if there are any, before the Lieutenant Governor has to leave us. So I would just unmute if you have a question.
So we do have a question from Yvette Kaufman-Bell. She said, I watched the press conference on the Permanent Land Grant Fund setting aside 1% for early childhood education. Will the OST programs be included in the conversations?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. And, that's going to be one of the pieces of legislation that's going to be up in front of us. Being a finance member when I was in the Senate for 11 years, I can understand some of the challenges that are there and why there's some hesitation to move that forward. But there's no doubt we have to do it. And that's why I voted on it every single year that it came up, that we needed to use some of the funds that we have to help New Mexico move forward from 50th rankings in many of those areas that we unfortunately find ourselves in. That's specific for early childhood, as far as I know right now. I think that they'd be wise to expand that a little bit, because we have to recognize that not only if the legislature passes it, all the legislature would be passing is a question that would go to the voters. And the more support that you can have and the more people that can benefit from these land grant permanent fund dollars, the more support that you're going to get it passed. So I think that's an excellent suggestion. At this point, I don't think that it's in there specifically for programs like that. It's more specific to the early childhood education portion of it. But I think that these are good discussions that should be added throughout the debate. So my advice is speak with your local legislators, share the importance of the work that you do and the out-of-school time programs, and get that included in this piece of legislation and on the ballot question.
Excellent, thank you. Couple more just real quick. One, which bills are most important to support in the legislative session for OST? I know we're still in the pre-file period for the legislative session, and I believe bills can continue to be filed through about the midpoint of the session. So we're not going to have anything like a comprehensive list, but if you are aware of any, that would be great.
Yeah, I can say right off the bat, and I'm glad that we have Valerie on the call with us. I'm glad that Mr. Chino's on the call and others, because I know right off the bat that we're still dealing with Yazi Martinez court case to make sure that we're providing as much support for all of our students across the state. And I know that there's been legislation in the past to provide more support for out-of-school time and after-school programs with our tribal community. So I think that that's an area that we'd want to support. And then the other was the one that I mentioned, as far as using, what I would propose is using non-recurring funds, or just funds that can be put in for $2 million from the some funds that are available right now within the PED's guidance. I think that could be done, and it becomes a finance issue, but I think it's so important that we do that. And so I'm confident with the legislators that we've been speaking with the work that Mai's been doing, that those two pieces of legislation will make a huge impact. Again, as a starting point. It's not that we get some funding that's done for 1 year and then we forget about it. No, just a starting point to continue to build on that for years to come.
All right, well, thank you very much for that information, Lieutenant Governor, and we will keep everybody posted on the $2 million bill that will be filed hopefully pretty soon. And I think, as in most, we'll keep a tab on these bills on our website. So if you go onto the nmos.org website, you'll see bills related to out of school time as they emerge during the session, and keep an eye on what's happening with those bills. So thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for joining us this morning. We will keep you posted on upcoming sessions and probably invite you back. We will, like I said, discuss community schools coming up, and I know that's another agenda that's close to your heart.
Absolutely, and I just would just ask Maya real quickly that you said you're going to meet like midway through the session. I'd love to be able to jump on there just to give an update, just to share where the legislations, a piece of legislations are. So if we can make that a point, I'll make sure to move my schedule around to join you to give you a legislative update.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Bye. All right, so with that, we're going to move on to Jen Rinehart, who's with us on the call, Senior Vice President for Research and Policy for the Afterschool Alliance and the national champion and organizer for our agenda. And she's going to present newly released data for the nation and New Mexico on the status of after school and summer learning. Welcome.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Just give me a little thumbs up if I'm coming through. Yeah, good. Okay, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen to share some data for you from America After 3 p.m. While that's coming up, I also wanted to just flag that's a really interesting conversation you all were having about the funding for early care and like, would there be opportunities to kind of connect that to OST? Because there's some really great research that makes the case that investments in early care, while certainly important, right, are not sufficient, that we need to build on those investments and support young people as they move into K through 12. So that could be some great research, and Mai and Jeff have seen actually the researcher present on that, so they're familiar with that and could talk to that as well. But just wanted to lift that up as a little bit of a transition here as we talk about the America After 3 p.m. data today. So what I have for you, for the most part here, are New Mexico specific data collected in early 2020. So these are largely pre-pandemic data, but we do have a little bit of mid-pandemic data to share as well. I'm going to give you as much New Mexico specific as I can, but there are some cases where I'm going to talk about national data because we can't do the breakdowns at the state level. And I'll just be sure to flag that for you so you know whenever we're using national data versus New Mexico specific data. All right, so what is America After 3? For folks who may not be familiar, just quickly, it's the most comprehensive look at how kids in America spend their after school hours. We do this study about every 5 to 6 years. It started back in 2004, and our most recent version prior to 2020 was the 2014 version. And we know from past editions of America After 3 that these data will be used for years to come by you all, after school providers, for grant proposals and other advocacy work that you may be doing, but also by policymakers and media and many others for years to come. So these are really critical data points that have a long lifespan and can help advance the field. Just a quick slide on methodology. I'm not going to talk through all of this, but important for you to know there are a lot of households included here, right? So it's more than 30,000 households at the national level, nearly 500 in New Mexico. So great level of responses here, both at the national level and in the state. We did, as I mentioned, a survey before the pandemic, but then have also complemented this with mid-pandemic data. We did offer the survey in both English and Spanish, and most of the surveys were done online, but were also supplemented by phone surveys as well to try and reach as many families as possible. Okay, so that's all the context. Let's dig into our findings. These are our 5 big takeaways, and we're going to just talk through each one of them in a little bit of detail. So this is just a summary slide for you. So moving on to our first takeaway is really that unmet demand has reached an all-time high. And you can see here, New Mexico specific information, if after school programs were available to them, 43% of all students who are not currently in a program in New Mexico, which is about 124,000 young people, would take advantage of programs if they were available. And that's up slightly since America After 3 started back in 2004. You've had some kind of ups and downs in terms of demand in New Mexico over the years that we've been doing the survey. But overall, this is the highest level of unmet demand expressed by families in New Mexico in the history of America After 3. You can see that in the state today, for every one child in a program, there are 3 more children who are waiting for programs to be available to them. So great advocacy points to help support things like the $2 million that Lieutenant Governor was just talking about. If we look more closely at the families who are expressing demand for after school within the state, we see that families of color, families with low income, and those with children in middle school are most likely to want their child to participate in a program. So that middle school point is a little bit different than the national level data. At the national level, it's most likely elementary school students who are looking for programs. So that's something that's unique here in New Mexico. I also want to flag that the orange box in the middle, the data may be a little bit skewed here because we're getting down to some pretty small sample sizes once we look at only non-participants and then within race, which is why you see something like the 100% under the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, because our sample size there is super small. But this gives you an idea of how the unmet demand is divided across races within the state of New Mexico. Also looking at who's alone after school here in New Mexico, the number of young people unsupervised in the hours after school has declined since 2014. And that does include a decline in elementary school students in particular. That's another place where New Mexico kind of varies from the national data, where we actually saw some slight increase in elementary schoolers unsupervised nationally, but that hasn't been the case in New Mexico. So that's good news, certainly for the state. We definitely don't want our youngest kiddos, right, going home unsupervised in the hours after school. Okay, so moving to our second takeaway, really looking at demand surging and the benefits that parents see from after school. And you can see here that behind the high levels of demand for after school is a growing recognition of the wide range of benefits that after school programs provide for young people and families. And some of the top things obviously are these kind of life skills like interacting with peers and building social skills, and also taking part in physical activity. And those are very consistent with what we see at the national level too. And parents also recognize benefits to families overall, where they're seen as a lifeline for working families. And you can see points around helping working parents keep their jobs and really giving working parents peace of mind, topping the list of benefits to families within the state of New Mexico. One of the great findings from America After 3 p.m. this time in terms of being able to talk about parent satisfaction with programs is that for families that are fortunate enough to have access to a program, parents are expressing the highest levels of satisfaction with their programs in the history of America After 3. That's nationally. In New Mexico, it's held steady from 2014 to 2020, but was already at a very high level. You can see that the extreme satisfaction level, though, has increased from 2014. So the intensity of satisfaction has grown over this time period, even if the overall number representing satisfaction hasn't increased. So we take this as really a good indicator of quality, right? If parents are satisfied with their programs, then they must be feeling like they're getting a high quality experience in those programs. So that's something certainly that you all should be celebrating there in the state. All right, so moving on to our third takeaway. For the first time in the history of America After 3, we do find a decline in the number of students who are benefiting from after-school programs, and cost and access are really barriers to participation. And you can see here in New Mexico, cost, lack of a safe way to get to and from programs, and lack of available programs really top the list of roadblocks that parents express when it comes to being able to access after-school programs. And I think one really interesting point for you all to consider is that lack of a safe way to get to and come home from programs has increased by 16 percentage points since 2014. So those issues around transportation might be something, I'm sure there's something you've all already talked about, given the geography of your state, but I would imagine that's something you want to continue to talk about as you think about how to help ensure more access to programs going forward. Those growing barriers have translated into fewer young people in after-school programs today, as I mentioned, than we've seen in the past. You can see here the chart shows kind of the trend overall, with again some ups and downs between 2004 and 2014, and now at our lowest level of participation in more than a decade in terms of the number of young people who are able to access programs. So again, definitely an area we want to try and hone in on, and again, a useful data point for any advocacy efforts to really make the case that we need more public funding for programs in order to ensure that every child who wants and needs a high quality, affordable after-school opportunity has access to one. So here's where I'm gonna diverge a little bit from your New Mexico level data and just talk about trends we see at the national level, which we would expect would hold up at the New Mexico level as well. While the decline overall in the number of young people in after school, and that's nationally too, that's not just a New Mexico trend, but nationally we see that same decline. While that decline is troubling enough, what's really troubling is that low income families are the ones who are disproportionately impacted by that decline. Between 2009 and between 2014 and 2020, the number of low income young people in after school fell by nearly 2 million kids, versus the number of higher income kids dropped by roughly 500,000. So we're seeing this growing gap in the number of low income young people who can access after school opportunities compared to their higher income peers. And one of the things we tried to do was really look at coupling that data with data on participation in the nation's largest funding streams for after school. And we found that over the same time period, so this 2014 to 2020 time period, about 2 million young people were benefiting from publicly funded programs like the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which tells us that these publicly funded programs have really been a lifeline for low-income young people and families, but they're not able to keep up with the costs, right? The cost of inflation, cost of minimum wage increases, the cost of quality that you all are working to really implement to get these high-quality experiences that show up in your satisfaction numbers. And if we look at just the 21st century investment period, over this time, if you just look on paper, the investment has grown, but when you adjust that for inflation, it actually turns out that that 28 million increase that you see on paper translates to an actual decrease of $10 million nationally in funding for 21st century because of those higher costs that everyone is facing. Okay, so I've already touched on inequities a little bit. We'll just dig a little bit deeper into those. This as well is also national level information. So I've mentioned how the barriers have grown since 2014. And here you can see that those barriers are even bigger among low income families. So as a result of these barriers, right, we're seeing low income families, families of color living in low income, also being the same families who are losing out on access to after school opportunities. And these inequities really extend beyond after school and to the broader range of out of school time opportunities. So we also looked at summer and at the kinds of clubs or lessons or sports that young people might be participating in that aren't technically sort of, don't classify as an after school program. And we found that higher income children are more likely to take part in all of those types of activities, with nearly 9 in 10 parents saying, higher income parents saying their child participates in one of those activities versus only 6 in 10 low income saying their child participates. And of course, that's related to resources. These higher income families are spending nearly 5 times more on out of school time activities each year compared to families in the lowest income bracket. Okay, so moving on to our 5th finding, and this is our last finding here, we find strong support for expanding after-school opportunities. You can see that support for public funding for after-school opportunities is up a little bit from 2014. It was 91% in 2014. It's up to 92%, so we'll take that, right? That's a win, a growing support for investment in after-school programs. And what's really great is we also see that this strong level of support cuts across party lines, which you can see here, but also really cuts across ethnicity and cuts across geography. And that this is one of those issues that can be really a unifying issue for conversation with our elected officials and with our voters and our parents and our public overall. So just touching for a minute on some of what we found kind of mid-pandemic. So these are some data points from the research that we did in October of 2020. These I do not have state level information for. This was a smaller sample size at the national level, but just helpful in terms of reinforcing in many cases that parental attitudes towards after school have stayed strong in the midst of COVID. And you can see even in the middle of this global pandemic, parents really see after school as a strong source of support for children and families and show support for public funding for programs. Many of you have been operating while schools have been virtual, and parents are recognizing that important role and want Congress to provide more funding to help make that happen. Of course, when we ask parents about their concerns to participating in after school right now, COVID-related concerns top the list. That's natural. But when we dig below those COVID-related concerns, we find the same main barriers to participating in after school remain in the middle of COVID that we saw pre-COVID. So it's cost, it's transportation, and lack of available programs. And even in the midst of COVID, demand is still high, with 49% of children who would participate in a program if one were available to them. And parent support for public funding remains really strong too, seeing just a 2% decrease from our pre-COVID numbers to our mid-COVID numbers in terms of public support for funding. And then lastly, while parents report that they're managing during the pandemic, they really do express concerns for their children. And parents want to see after-school programs really address more than academics as a result of those concerns. So these are great data points to help push. We can't just go like double down on academics, right? We need to focus on the more comprehensive needs of youth and young people as we work through this pandemic and work to emerge from this pandemic. After-school programs can't just become more school. They really do need to go back to our roots and really focus on the well-rounded supports that we're known for giving young people, and the reason young people and families keep showing up to programs day after day. All right, so this is just where you can get more information. There's a great data dashboard there that you can explore even more New Mexico specifics than what I was able to share with you, and I'm gonna stick around and happy to answer questions now and later as well.
We do have a couple of quick questions. Thank you very much, Jen. This is really great. Great presentation, great information for everybody to have. Are you okay with us sharing a PDF of these slides with folks?
Definitely.
Okay. All right, then the answer to your question, Randy, is yes, we will put this the slides up on the NMOST website and send something out to registrants saying where they can find them. The other question that we got was, are we able to see the New Mexico data in a county by county view?
That would be a dream, right? We would love to, I would love to be able to say that that's the case, but sadly, we don't have a large enough sample size within the state to be able to break that down by county too. We just get down to the N sizes are going to be too small that nothing there is really reliable to be able to use.
Right, right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
and any more questions real quick? We've exhausted the ones that were put into the chat, so going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jen, and maybe something else will come in before the last few minutes when we have time for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer, for making the time for us. I think she has her week off, if I'm not wrong. So she made some special time for New Mexico. And this data is for all of you to use in your grant proposals, in your conversations with legislators or decision makers. So we'll be very happy to share the slide deck with you. And like Jennifer said, there is a data board and deck at the Afterschool Alliance website as well. So please, this is for you to use to make sure that children and youth have access and that parents can have a peace of mind when they go to work. So with that, we're going to move on to our next speaker, and that's Colby Wilson, CEO of Boys and Girls Club of Central New Mexico, who will talk about the need for services for older youth. And like Jennifer said, we had I think a special data point for middle school for New Mexico, that there's a need for programming. So take it away, Colby.
Thank you, Mai. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone see my screen okay? Awesome. Thank you for the thumbs up there. A little bit about myself. I have been with the Boys and Girls Club movement for over 20 years. Started my career in Tacoma, Washington. Very passionate about the impact that Boys and Girls Clubs can have on young people. Even more passionate about the collaborative efforts and the fact that the Boys and Girls Club can't solve many of the issues that our communities are facing by ourselves. And over the last year and a half, having accepted this position here in Central New Mexico, you know, I've just been really impressed and energized by the collaboration, the coordination, folks from APS. I know Yvette and Randy are on the call, leaders at the city of Albuquerque, Sasha. Everybody's just been really collaborative, and you know, people want to solve these problems. People are passionate about turning some of these numbers that we're frustrated with here in New Mexico. And I'm just, you know, appreciative to be part of this team, all of you folks on this call right now. And I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper to some of the information that Jen provided. I was really excited to see that her data is aligning well with what I'm going to present here today. So thank you, Jen, for backing me up here. Appreciate it. So I wanted to specifically talk about the gap. You know, I've spent the last year and a half, in addition to trying to survive COVID and manage all of that emergency stuff, really learning about what's out there from an out of school, you know, as far as out of school time. What are the programs that are out there? Where are the gaps? And where can the Boys and Girls Club, you know, not compete or provide competition or duplicate? Where can the Boys and Girls Club grow and expand into areas that maybe aren't covered right now? And what I've learned, and I think what Jen's data confirms as well, is there is a lot of effort being put into out of school time for elementary youth. And that's fantastic. I mean, I want to congratulate the folks here in Central New Mexico, the city, the schools, the nonprofits, Children's Choice, Rio Grande Collaborative. Boys and Girls Clubs have some programs in elementary schools as well. But as you can see, 96% of the elementary schools in APS have a program on site, an out of school program on site at the school. Out of, I think there's almost 90 elementary schools. That's an amazing effort to provide that opportunity for kids in elementary schools. And that's not even counting the many city community centers that offering free out of school programming at their community centers as well. And you know, the Boys and Girls Club, we have a site here on Truman Street, and we're doing that as well. So so that's great. One of the things that, you know, once you get beyond the elementary school, the research I did here in APS, out of the 30 middle schools, there's currently only one consistent all day, you know, after school, out of school time program in the 28 to 30 middle schools here in the APS school district. And so why is that a problem? You know, I think many people might think, oh, well, those kids can go home by themselves, they'll be fine. It's not, you know, that's not really a need in the community. But, you know, the data shows that, you know, the gap starts to widen in some of these academic achievement areas. You can see in math and science, the percentage of not proficient increases from 4th grade to 11th grade. We're going from 76 not proficient in math to 88% by the time they reach 11th grade. So, and that's a trend that may not necessarily be specific to APS or New Mexico. That may be a national trend, but I think it highlights the need that, you know, we can't just stop reaching out and serving these young people once they get old enough to go home by themselves. We can't do that. So
there's like 61 people in.
So why is there that gap? And we are going to present, I think, some more data on this gap. Sasha's going to come out in a few months with a great gap analysis on where there might be some need here in the community for out of school time. But let's just start with some of the obvious things, right? Kids legally don't need to be supervised at that age group. You can't have a kindergartner or a first grader go home by themselves. That's illegal. So there's the obvious there. Kids in the middle school age group, once they are old enough to go home by themselves, they don't necessarily want to be supervised after school. So that's another challenge, another barrier that I think organizations, even the Boys and Girls Club, have trouble getting over sometimes. Obviously, you can't charge fees. Parents, if there's any barrier financially, they're going to choose to let their kids go home by themselves after school as opposed to paying for an after school program every day. The subsidy here in New Mexico for childcare funding, I think, ends at the age 11. So beyond that, organizations have a hard time getting reimbursed for the services they're providing, and it's tough to sustain an all day or an after school, you know, daily program that's not generating any revenue. And then the last one is the young people, the teens. They are choosing to come to these programs most often. So you're faced with that challenge of having a really cool, you know, word of mouth advertising type of opportunity to get real good participation among middle school and some of the younger high school students for these programs. So I don't know if anybody had any other thoughts on why there seems to be a gap. And you know, I would say that this is not unique to Central New Mexico, to Albuquerque, Rio Rancho. You know, we face, you know, in my 20 years at Boys and Girls Clubs, this is a gap that exists in a lot of communities. And I think these are some of the universal reasons why. Questions on that, the gap and things around teens?
I don't know that it's specific to the gap around teens. I'm wondering, what is the current status of your sites like at Emerson Elementary, for example? Are you able to continue with those programs?
Good question, Jeff. Actually, the APS schools are not open for in-person services. We actually have our site over here at Truman Street, our Boys and Girls Club facility, open all day. And we have about 45 kids coming in and attending school virtually with COVID safe practices, but we're not open at our elementary schools. There just wasn't, you know, and I think this is something everybody in this out of school space knows. The demand for out of school, after school program has kind of taken a back seat right now during the pandemic. And, you know, the message is stay home. don't you know, social distance, things like that. So, you know, I'm looking at post-pandemic, right? The numbers we just looked at around academic success and things, those gaps are going to be even wider next fall after, you know, so many kids in middle school have been on their own for a year. Anybody who's got them, I've got a young middle schooler, and if we're not on him every single day to complete assignments, you know, it's very easy to fall behind. So, you know, I'm focused on that time next fall when school comes back, hopefully, and there's this huge need around out of school. It's going to be even bigger.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Colby. You know, I'm a member of the JJAG board, a Juvenile Justice Advisory Group for the governor, and I think there are some great opportunities here for collaboration around juvenile justice funding. So that's something that may be another discussion coming down the line, that how does the after-school teen focus align with prevention and juvenile justice funding that's allocated to prevention. So that's something that we may want to explore in a future discussion session here with you
Great.
and others.
Awesome. Thank you. So, you know, I wanted to focus more on the actual gap that exists, the problem that's out there, but I also wanted to, you know, throw out a few things that the Boys and Girls Club is going to be focused on moving forward in collaboration, obviously, with our schools and other government partners, nonprofits. You know, first, you know, my job as CEO of the Boys and Girls Club is to serve more youth, advocate for the impact that Boys and Girls Club has on young people. But even bigger than that, I feel responsibility to the community to go where the need is, right? If there's a lot of great programming happening at the elementary level, the schools are covered, there's great Boys and Girls Club doesn't need to compete with that. We don't need to duplicate that. So how can we focus our resources and our efforts on going into the middle schools, creating teen centers, working with our other government partners that have facilities to provide programs for these, where this gap is. I know Explora is either has or getting ready to open a teen center focused on STEM. And, you know, I'm sure the data they were looking at around math and science scores is a huge thing, reason why they did that. So how can we partner with them to help transport middle school kids to the STEM teen center that they have downtown? These are the types of things that we need to focus on: STEM programming, workforce readiness, providing those interest-based programs that middle school students will choose to come to on a daily basis. And then by being there on a daily basis, they get the great mentorship and inspiration from our staff and our AmeriCorps members. You know, one of the things I think we need to think about as a community is how we use 21st century funding. Jen mentioned it. You know, the CYFD funding is a great funding source for elementary youth, and we can get a site license, we can generate some good revenue, make it essentially, you know, no cost for the families to come, get reimbursed for that service. Let's focus on that funding for elementary school youth, and maybe leveraging the 21st century funding for the youth that are too old to qualify for that CYFD funding. So those are some of the things that I think we should talk about and we should work on as a community. And just wanted to do my job here as the Boys and Girls Club CEO, share you know, the great impact that we can have when young people come to the club. We've got best practices all over the country, great examples of teen centers, programs in elementary schools. People think, oh, well, kids won't come to an after-school program every day once they get to middle school. Well, we have examples all across the country where that's not true. And, you know, it's all about your staff. It's all about your programming and the strategy you have on reaching out to those youth. So I think we can bring some of that expertise to this age group. And I'm just excited to work with everybody on this call and in the community to help do that.
All right. Thank you so much, Colby. Due to the time, we need to move on to the next speaker, but I believe Colby will stay on for the whole time and we will have Q&A at the end. Jeff, do you see one quick question that we could potentially do right now from the Q&A list? You muted.
One sort of question slash, oh, go ahead.
Hi, Jeff, this is Yvette. I'm sorry, from APS. I hate we're going to have to get off a little early, so we won't be on for question and answer session. Can I just address a couple of things?
Yes.
With Colby, thank you so much for recognizing APS as a viable partner. We definitely have enjoyed working with yourself and Christian and all of our partners throughout APS. It has been a joy. I know that there were a couple of things mentioned as far as middle schools, and I don't know if your data represents club-based programs or it also represents school-ran middle school programs, but our data is showing a little bit different because we've included those two data points as well, and we'd be glad to share that with you, but I believe your assessment is 100% on when it relates to sustainable longevity, funding sources for middle school programs. You are correct. We need that. We need that for our middle schools. And so I know that you're working with Tyson over at PED on the 21st Century program. We've been in lots of conversations with Highland High School, ABC Community Schools, with those middle school feeder programs coming in and working with them for that Highland and that district. So we're excited to have Boys and Girls Club as a partner in that effort, as well as many other efforts. And so I do want to say that APS does have currently school-based programs. During the pandemic, we have about 14 school sites. I know many of our providers tried to offer programs within the pandemic, but they had to pull out. They had to pull out because of many different reasons that many of you around the state are experiencing right now due to the pandemic. But we honor everyone for their efforts and for trying to offer those services to our communities. But if you are in the Albuquerque area and you've been looking for middle school or even elementary school full day comprehensive childcare within APS, those programs are listed on our website, and I will drop the link in the chat box. Thank you, Mai, and thank you, Jeff, for allowing me that space because Randy and I do have to jump off for another meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Yvette, for doing what you do. And Yvette is the coordinator for all out-of-school time in Albuquerque Public Schools. And with that, I think we need to give our thanks to Colby for being here today and save the remainder of the questions to the end of the session. And we certainly will work with Colby on advancing that agenda. And the next speaker up, there's going to be two, Melissa Candelaria and Alisa Diehl, senior education attorneys with the Center for Law and Poverty. They're going to talk about the Yelsey Martinez lawsuit. And we do know that is the one lawsuit that's driving educational change in our state. And we would like to learn more as to how that relates to the out-of-school time needs among disadvantaged youth in our city and state. So I want to call on both of you to unmute. And Melissa and Alisa will also introduce Conroy Chino.
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much, Mai and Jeff, for having me. And just to clarify, my colleague Melissa is not joining us today. It will just be me, and so hopefully I will suffice. I will do my very best. So with that, I will jump in. As you mentioned, I'm here today to talk about how after-school programming plays a critical role, a central role in the programs and services that are required that the state offered to our students in order for them to be college and career ready. So I will share my screen here. Let's see. 1 second. Okay, let's
Just a minute, please.
All right. All right. Does that look okay? All right.
Looks great, thanks.
All right. So my name is Alisa Diehl. I'm an attorney at the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty. I'm the education team. I'm also a member of the legal team representing the Yazzie plaintiffs in the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. And so this morning I'm going to give a very, very, very brief background and summary of the lawsuit and how after-school programs are addressed in it. So our state constitution requires that the state provide a sufficient and uniform public education. However, here in New Mexico, public schools have been insufficient and inequitable, and they are starved of resources. The system lacks a multicultural and multilingual framework that truly embraces the cultural and linguistic assets of our students. And the state has failed to provide educational programs and opportunities for students to succeed. Therefore, in 2014, this parent and advocate, along with a group of other parents and a few school districts, sued the state of New Mexico to improve education not only for her own children, but for all students being failed by our education system. This, of course, is the wonderful Wilhelmina Yazzie and her son. The Yazzie Martinez lawsuit is based on the rights of our students to be college and career ready. So in an insufficient and inequitable education system, those most impacted by the failures of the state are the students in 4 groups. A group that the court has deemed at risk, and those are Native American students, English language learners, students with disabilities, and students from low-income households, which here in New Mexico make up almost 80% of our public education students statewide. In 2018, after years of litigation, Judge Sarah Singleton issued a decision where she found that the state has violated the state constitution by failing to provide a sufficient public education system that allows all students the opportunity to be college and career ready. The judge cited many specific reforms that the state needs to make, and this is boiling down almost 700 pages of findings of fact that the judge addressed into 5 bullet points. So this is a very high level summary, but kind of the foundation of this is a multicultural, multilingual framework that honors and embraces our cultural and linguistic assets of our students, provide effective programs and services, and this is what I'll come back to talk about after school programming, address issues related to teacher recruitment, retention, and diversity, provide sufficient funding, and provide oversight and accountability. And the judge did point out that we know here in New Mexico what works to improve education, and that lack of funding isn't an excuse. So what did the judge say about after-school programs? Well, I will say this, that in over 700 pages, as I mentioned, after-school programs, other out-of-school time opportunities such as tutoring or summer school are cited over 50 times. And so I think that illustrates that this type of programming plays a critical role in really closing the achievement gaps, the opportunity gaps for our students who are most failed, right, by the failures of the state. So the state has a duty to provide reasonable curricula, the judge said, and that means effective programs and services, which include out-of-school programming to the students in the 4 student groups. The judge recognized that after-school programs have proven to provide support that those students need, and that, as we've heard about quite a bit today already, that students who participate in these programs show higher grade achievement, have an increased likelihood of graduating high school, engage in less risky behaviors. And this is particularly true for students from low-income households, among others. The court recognized that access to after-school programming is a critical need for students within the 4 student groups: Native American students, English language learners, students with disabilities, and students from low-income households. However, not all school districts provide after-school programs due to lack of funding, even though we know from reports that we discussed today that there is a need for this, that there are wait lists, and that there is a desire for students who want to participate. So not only is there the issue, of course, of program funding itself, but then of transportation for those students who participate, as again we've talked about today, but that some districts are able to provide a program perhaps, but not able to provide transportation, so that then the program is truly only accessible to students with personal transportation. And of course that can leave out many of the students who are really the target of these programs. Since the judge's decision in 2018, the state has taken steps, but it's our position that that's been limited and has not resulted in creating a sufficient public education system. And that's true of these programmatic measures such as after-school programming. However, our state has the ability to be groundbreaking in transforming public education, but we have a lot more work to do. And so, you know, the position of our clients, of our plaintiffs, which includes Ms. Wilhelmina Yazzie, the other parents, and the school district, is we want the state to come up with a comprehensive plan that includes long-term implementation steps and funding streams that is based on the actual need of our students, and specifically those in the 4 student groups. And of course, an integral piece of this is how to build out these programs, including after-school programs, so that all students who need access to these programs have it. And that's why we're here today, to talk about those things. And you know, this will continue to be an effort that that we're working on with the help of all of our organizational partners who are really, you know, the boots on the ground in this fight, such as New Mexico Out of School Time and others who are looking at these issues, really identifying how we best tackle them to reach our common goal of meeting the needs of you know, the 4 student groups addressed in the lawsuit. So I'm happy to take questions, or I will pass the mic and take them at the end if there are any.
We don't have any questions in the chat at this point, so I think let's move on to, excuse me, Mr. Chino. And Conroy Chino is of the Acoma Pueblo, and he is also associated with the Tribal Education Alliance, and is going to talk to us a little bit about some of the specific issues and needs in the Native American community. And like Alisa just said, that is one of the identified groups that is suffering from the disparities in our educational system. So Conroy, please take over.
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for having me and inviting me to be part of the list of presenters here this morning. Gives me a chance, or gave me a chance, to put on a clean Zoom shirt and put on my favorite blue Zoom jacket for this occasion. I want to spend a little bit of time sharing some information based on this historic ruling that came down in the Yazzie Martinez case, largely contained in an effort called the Tribal Remedy Framework. It was put together by a number of advocates and stakeholders and tribal leaders, tribal parents, and tribal communities who all had some input into this particular response to the court's ruling. I also want to talk about a concept called education sovereignty, which is part of what we're describing to be a series of solutions that we'd like to see have happen in the education of Native children. Then I also want to talk a little bit about solutions that we've come up with in addition to education sovereignty, based around the concepts of community-based education and also tribal libraries. So, but I do also want to share with you where we are with our legislative effort to get some bills passed that will address the court's mandates and the ruling in the Yazzie Martinez case. But I want to begin by sharing a little bit of information about myself for those of you that may not know me or know who I am. As Jeff mentioned, I'm from the Pueblo of Acoma, which is about 60 miles west of Albuquerque. I grew up there in a very traditional home where we spoke mainly Acoma, a Keres language that 5 other Pueblos speak, and bus to school every day from our small village out there, spending about 45 minutes to an hour one way to get to school. My after-school activities included mainly doing chores like chopping wood and hauling water and feeding our animals, horses, sheep, and chickens that we had. Summers were spent with my great-grandfather at his alfalfa and his cornfields. And grew up in a, immersed in the tradition, the culture there at Acoma, with strong family ties, strong clanship ties. And the one, well, there are 2 things that happened in my life. One was that during the summer months, we'd have a mobile library unit that would come lumbering into our small community there. And that, I think, provided this kind of look beyond the reservation boundaries by being able to check out library books from this mobile unit. And the other major event was the introduction of television to our family home. We were probably one of the first families there at our village to have a television set and a TV antenna sticking out of our sun-baked home. It was a small 19-inch Motorola, black and white, that sat significantly in the corner of our living room. And that really changed things in our household. My great-grandfather, who spent time sharing a lot of his growing up, as well as stories and legends that were part of Acoma culture with us, got replaced by primetime programming there at Acoma, or at least in our household. He didn't speak any English, but he knew the universal word for television, TV. And so when I would get off the bus after school and come racing home, one of the first things he would ask me to do was to, well, he'd tell me in Acoma, he'd call me over, he'd say, "Hawaii manana." Nana is the word for grandson. "Hawaii manana, so TV show back." So, and I knew exactly what he was referring to. So the other significant thing that happened in my life is I got sent off to boarding school. So at age 13, I went to a boarding school out in California, left my family, left my village, and was out there until I graduated. Went to UNM, went to Princeton, spent 25 years in the news gathering business, was a cabinet secretary under former Governor Bill Richardson, and have spent the last 12 years advocating and lobbying for tribes at the state legislature. So that, in a nutshell, is my life. But I do really want to focus on some recent events that occurred since the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit came down in 2018. A group was formed with no real official title, except that it consisted of stakeholders, education experts, advocates, tribal members, tribal leaders, parents, who really wanted to take advantage of this historic ruling that came down the Yazzie Martinez case, and to offer the state a response to what had been identified in this lawsuit, namely that there was a violation of the state's constitution and the fact that the state had not provided a sufficient and an adequate and a uniform education to Native children. So while a good portion of that has been left up to the state to take care of in response to the lawsuit, what we wanted to do at our end was to develop a response that was reflective of what we felt were the needs of our own students. And so the tribal remedy framework became this comprehensive plan of ideas and initiatives and concepts that we wanted to offer the state. Again, it was the tribal response to the court's mandates. So there were a series of tribal community meetings. They were held throughout Indian country here in New Mexico. And what happened and what resulted were solutions that were designed to really prompt a fundamental shift in the approach of how Native children were educated, creating a new education paradigm that was grounded in the principle of equity and guided by a number of solutions. And three of them I'll share with you. One was to create a shared responsibility in the education of our Native children, along with increasing tribal control over the schooling of Native children. And again, it was built around community-based education and centered within tribal communities, offering a balanced, culturally and linguistically relevant education that revitalized and sustained the strengths of a tribal community, as well as put an emphasis on core values. And so what we developed in the course of our discussions and a series of meetings was the development of a concept called education sovereignty. And it was centered on the idea of having tribal communities and tribal governments taking control over the schooling of their children. And also included that was the concept of partnering with public schools and school districts, and partnering on decision-making when it came to school governance and budgets and programming. Native children are not only tribal citizens of their respective communities, but they're also US citizens. They're also New Mexico citizens. And so we felt that tribal governments had the duty to oversee the education of their children and include a variety of programs and services, including the preservation and the teaching of indigenous languages and cultures and cultural values. It really called for a holistic understanding and awareness of education, not only from early childhood, but also primary and secondary, all the way through college, and was also, I think, we used anyway, the existing state law, the Indian Education Act, which requires almost the same kind of concept, this continuum of education and a collaboration between tribal education departments that many tribes have, and this community-based concept that I was talking about, along with partnering with the LEAs and also universities that offered a variety of programs and services that were oriented towards Native communities and Native education initiatives. Really called for really a form of transforming education that attempted to address this systemic failure by the state to educate Native children. So what we attempted to do was really get at the root cause of this failure. And we felt that one of the ways that we really wanted to address this was to be able to provide programs and services within our own tribal communities through a series of programs and services developed by Native education experts, and offer those in an ongoing manner, but not only after school, providing after school services, extended learning, summer school, tutoring, mentoring, all of those things. But we also felt that it required a huge investment by the state, investment in the tribal education capacity building or building capacity within tribal communities. And that included infrastructure, these community-based programs and services that I mentioned, as well as the investment in preserving and protecting native languages and culture, as well as being able to develop culturally and linguistically relevant curriculum. So what we did and what we offered and have offered to the state is to be able to address under this tribal remedy framework the idea of addressing that critical need that exists in every tribal community, and that is the need for tribal libraries. And so we thought that one of the best ways to build out this concept of community-based education was to build them around and use tribal libraries as the hub, as the base for what we wanted to achieve and what we wanted to attain. Many tribal libraries in communities were probably never designed to be libraries. They're buildings that are at this point old and tired looking, in need of major repair or replacement. So we felt that the not only after school but other kinds of services and possibilities could occur under this whole initiative of libraries, tribal libraries, ones that every town and city in New Mexico offers its young people and its communities. And certainly the pandemic has really exposed a lot of other shortcomings and needs that exist in tribal communities, including a lack of high-speed internet and access to connectivity so that students can do and engage in online learning. So tribal libraries then became this real major effort on the part of the Tribal Education Alliance to pursue by having legislation introduced over the last couple of sessions, and bills have been drafted and prepared and will be introduced again this coming session. So the hope is that tribal libraries will be funded as part of our infrastructure requests, along with providing programs and services under this concept of community-based education. Those are some of the things that we're pursuing under the tribal remedy framework. And though we understand that we didn't want to have this one-size-fits-all set of solutions or approaches, because we know that tribes are unique and different with their own set of needs. And so we recognize that and respected that, and really understand that that this whole concept of equity is different from the idea of equality, and that it should require incorporating indigenous knowledge and values to create this balanced and relevant education that's centered on our students and on our tribal communities. So I want to close by sharing with you a quote from Governor Vial from the Pueblo of Acoma. And he said this, he said that we have a chance to bend history, to make it different, to create change, so that in the totality of all our actions, we will have shaped a future generation that of Native children who has it better than we do. It takes and will take acts of courage and a strong belief that the history of Native people will be shaped by what we do today, and this change must occur. So Jeff and others, I will end with that and take any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you so much. That was a really fascinating presentation, and really appreciate you being here today. We do have a question. Valerie Belson, who works in the library on Zuni Pueblo, says, Eloqua, thank you for participating in this listening session. I would like to ask for your support and consideration in inviting the 19 Pueblo libraries of New Mexico to join the NMOST network. What do you think about this? as I participate and continue to learn from this group, I believe that if all 19 of our tribal libraries connect and participate together in events with NMOST, we would continue to bring great and high quality after school programming to the children of our communities. So I guess it's kind of a multi-part question. So that's the first part. And then she also asks, how many libraries educate and strengthen the message of your organization? And would you consider hosting listening sessions with tribal libraries and their patrons?
Thank you very much for that question, Valerie. During the time that we held, these convocations that were held across Indian country in New Mexico, one group that really was instrumental in developing this idea of community-based education using tribal libraries as a hub was this New Mexico Tribal Libraries Association. There are a number of individuals who were involved in that. And so they had a lot of input, they provided a lot of input, and they also were very instrumental in providing public testimony during the times that our proposed legislation was being heard in various committees at the Roundhouse. So I think it's a great idea. I think, teaming up with the New Mexico Out of School Time Network would be great because as I shared with you, tribal libraries really are going to be the main centers of these initiatives that we hope will get funded and also implemented in tribal communities across New Mexico.
Yeah, and I would like to echo that as an answer that would be something we definitely could do, to do one of these sessions focus on libraries and support that initiative and invite legislators and help educate the broader audience as to the need and how it helps support that whole agenda. So thank you so much, Conroy. That was such a fascinating story and how it ties all the way back to the mobile library that arrived in your community years ago, and to see the impact that it has on young people, from a very young age. I lived in a small rural town myself, and my dad used to drop me off at the library, and that was my only thing to do, was to get a book before I got home for the whole week. And just a rural town and nothing else to do but play in the cornfields, or I was actually wheats where I was growing up. So I have strong memory and strong attachment to books myself. So I personally believe in that agenda. And Jeff, do we have any more questions for Conroy from the Q&A?
I'm not seeing anything at this point. Jen does mention that they have some library-specific info in the America After 3 p.m. data, and that there's just so much data to mine, so be sure to poke around in there. I also wanted to mention that Representative Derek Lente has, for a couple of years in a row, and I'm assuming that it will happen again this year, put forward bills to try to improve the infrastructure for libraries on the Pueblos, and to increase the broadband capability. So I'm hoping that those will go through, and hopefully those will get funded this time. And I believe the Tribal Education Alliance is also working with sponsors on a bill for providing funding for facilitation of some after-school programs at the libraries, so that it helps to reduce the need for transportation and makes sure that the programs are culturally relevant and appropriate for the participants. So just wanted to mention those real quick. We do have a few more questions for other presenters today. Let me jump back. Alisa, there was a question about, is the fourth student group, which was the low-income student group, is that broken down by ethnicity in addition, within that category?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It is not, actually. So it is the 4 student groups that are students from low-income families is defined pretty specifically using metrics such as free and reduced lunch, that type of thing. It was something that we actually think is not a great measurement of that student group, but that's what was used. That's what's used by the state, and that's what the court used in its decision.
Okay, cool. And I know that New Mexico Voices for Children has a New Mexico, I think it's Kids Count database that also has a lot of demographic information that probably has some cross-cutting data around percentages of different ethnic groups that live in poverty and percentages of people who are in poverty who belong to different ethnic groups. So kind of a both directions thing. So that might be one source of that information. For Colby, we did have a question. Virtual mentoring programs at no charge for middle schools is one area that I believe is a gap. How can the Boys and Girls Club and other out of school time organizations help us with that? And shoot, I lost that. I think that was from Beatriz Valenciana at Hayes Middle School, I believe is who that came from.
Yeah, absolutely. We can help with that. We actually did a little bit of virtual mentoring right as the pandemic hit and everything was shut down. So I will reach out to Beatrice at Hayes and come up with some plans for that.
Excellent, thank you. And also, the other question for you, Colby, was I wonder what is the support of the school districts to host an after-school program at their sites? In other words, are you getting support from the districts and schools?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fact that, there are, almost every elementary school has a partner on site there shows that they're, really committed to working on this. I think the issue in the middle schools, again, is just sustainability, where you can charge fees and get CYFD subsidy at the elementary level. You can't do that at the middle school level. So we need to leverage some more of that government funding to make it sustainable every year so that we can keep it going.
Right, right.
And the district's role really, they provide the facility, they provide access to the technology and the different spaces in the school, which is a huge resource.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. And then one final question, I think this is somewhat general, not necessarily directed at anyone specifically, is are there any bills with funding for libraries coming up in this session? Like I said, I believe there's the one bill that the Tribal Education Alliance is working on to provide some funding for after school or out of school time programs at tribal libraries. Other than that, though, I'm not aware of anything.
Yeah, and with that, we want to thank all the speakers today. This has been a wonderful, rich conversation with such a varied input with data and stories and cultural perspectives that is so critical in New Mexico with the student body that we have. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today and listen in. And I have a feeling we may hear from these speakers again. As a network, we look for new partners and new allies, and I think we've gained some new insights as to who that can be today. So I want to particularly, thank Alisa and Conroy and Colby and Jen for joining us. And then, of course, we have the Lieutenant Governor who is standing behind us as a champion for this cause. And we do have representatives from the Public Education Department in the call today, and we will follow up with some calls for sure to make sure that they know what our plans are for that $2 million bill that we may want to put on the table again this year. So with that, we want to close this call, and in 2 weeks we'll do another one, 28th of January at 10 a.m. And the plan is to focus on community schools. And if you have ideas of who you would like to see on that call or a data that we can present, let us know. And I think we heard a call for a session on libraries, which seems to be the central bill coming forth for after school on or in tribal communities. I think that would be something we want to try to put together, and we're going to need your help to get speakers to that call. So I'm going to call on Valerie and Conroy and potentially Alisa to help us put that together. And that's how the network works. We listen to you and we create conversations that's of interest to you. So if you have additional ideas for another session or two, during the legislative session, let us know, and we will work to put that together. So with that, we want to say thank you again to the speakers and all of you, and wish you a great afternoon. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.